Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a theological text that lays out a really powerful and, for some, pretty radical vision for the future of the Christian church. And you know what's interesting? It all kicks off not with some grand prophecy, but with a simple puzzle.
So where did this all start? Not with a bold declaration, but with a personal quest. The author was reading the Gospel of John, and a single Greek word, doxo, just didn't sit right with him based on his classical studies. And this little linguistic mystery, well, it ended up sparking a journey that would totally redefine his entire perspective.
So here's how we're going to break this down. We're going to follow the author's path, starting with that word puzzle. Then we'll dig into the 7 distinct marks he says will define this church, the wild global scene it's supposedly going to emerge in, and finally, what he sees as its ultimate destiny, becoming an unshakable kingdom.
Okay, so what was this puzzle with the word glory? Well, you have to understand the author's background was in classical philosophy. He knew the word doxo from reading Plato, where it meant one thing, but the way the New Testament used it, it just didn't line up at all. And this, right here, is the absolute core of the whole revelation. In classical Greek, doxo is kind of flimsy. It's about opinion, perception, what seems to be true. But in the New Testament, wow, it gets a major upgrade. It's not about an idea anymore. It describes the actual, visible, tangible presence of God showing up, a reality you can experience.
So this new definition completely changes the game. The idea of a glorious church stops being just a symbolic title, like a nice compliment, and becomes a very literal description. The author is making the case for a church that isn't just called glorious, but one that is literally filled with the tangible presence of God. Okay, so once he nails down that definition, the author then lays out how this kind of church actually comes to be. He points to the book of Ephesians and pulls out 7 distinct marks, or maybe you could call them stages, in its development. Now, what's so cool here is that this isn't a random checklist. The author sees it as a deliberate process, a building plan. It all starts with being glorious, that is, literally filled with God's presence. That's the foundation. From there, the church becomes holy and without blemish, set apart and pure. And then it shifts to a group effort, achieving unity of the faith and everyone together acknowledging Jesus' headship. This leads to a state of maturity, where finally it manifests the fullness of Christ. It's a whole process, building from the inside out.
And this is where things get really intense. The author argues that this glorious church doesn't just pop up in a vacuum. No, it appears on a world stage that is going through its own dramatic and, he would say, prophetic shift.
He leans heavily on this prophecy from Isaiah to set up a powerful contrast. The main idea is simple. As the world gets darker, politically, socially, morally, the church is designed to get brighter. This creates a really stark, impossible to ignore difference between the two.
And he backs this up by pulling from the very last book of the Bible, arguing that a great polarization is on its way, a time when the middle ground just kind of dissolves and everything gets pushed to its extreme. It forces a clear choice. There's no more sitting on the fence.
This idea of a sharpening divide where being neutral just isn't an option anymore, it really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? The text is suggesting we're heading for a world that's not defined by shades of gray, but by a stark contrast of light and darkness.
So in response to this growing darkness, what does the author see for the church? Is it supposed to be an institution in retreat, hiding away? Absolutely not. The vision is for a church that's rising up with more glory and influence than ever before.
To paint a picture of this emerging church, the text uses these incredible, dynamic metaphors. We're not talking about a static, stuffy old building. Think about these images: a beautiful bride, a terrifying army with banners, a sun that just keeps getting brighter, and a river that grows and grows until it's a mighty ocean. These are all pictures of unstoppable, beautiful, and powerful momentum.
And this isn't just about looking good. The text prophesies that this church will have a real-world impact. The idea is that as worldly systems and leaders get to the end of their rope, completely out of answers, they'll actually turn to this glorious body for wisdom and solutions they can't find anywhere else.
To make this more concrete, the author shares this really personal vision he had. He saw a picture of a small, humble stream, but then it became a river, then a great river, and finally a massive ocean that covered the entire earth. It's such a powerful symbol for the church's expanding influence. So, all of this leads us to the final part of the author's vision, the establishment of a kingdom that is uniquely able to stand firm through any and every global crisis.
This whole idea is built on a prophecy from Haggai, which talks about a great shaking of everything that can be shaken. And we're not just talking about economies or governments. We're talking about policies, infrastructure, every single human institution you can think of.
So what's the result of this great shaking? Well, according to the author's take, it's a great transfer. As people watch earthly systems fail, they'll start moving their resources, their loyalty, and themselves away from the unstable things and into this stable, glorious body that's left standing.
Then, the author brings it all right back down to a personal level. He says his own life's motivation comes from a vision he was given, a distant mountain peak that he's committed to reaching, no matter what storms, clouds, or obstacles get in the way. It's that vision that keeps him pressing forward. And so, he doesn't end with a neat little summary. He ends with a direct invitation. He turns his personal vision and this whole theological argument into a question for the reader and for us to think about. Is this a journey you want to be a part of? And that's a question worth considering long after this explainer is over.